Aotearoa, and really nice to be here. So thumbs up, you can hear me okay, Joe? Yep, great. So, I mean, you guys really are the experts when it comes to educating in the youth space, and we have a lot of knowledge around vaping itself and a little bit of that background of where we are today. And it's something that we've been very passionate about since 2017, and I like to think have had some influence in actually the policies that we have today. So the idea of this is to do a presentation. It's quite interactive. We've got time for questions afterwards, but hopefully it's just going to give you some tools to really incorporate or think about how you're going to create the program that's going to schools, basically. So tonight we're going to cover, I'll just do this. So tonight we're going to cover what's the problem itself. Do we have a problem in New Zealand? What challenges are we up against? What the latest regulations are around vaping, and how we educate our non-smoking rangatahi not to start. So hopefully you've all seen the website or been in to have a look at the Don't Get Sucked In website. This is a website that we created and launched in the beginning of 2020. If I just go into this, hopefully you can have a little look. I just want to really show you what's in there. I won't go through everything, but you'll be able to see what you can utilize as part of this website. There's a quiz of 10 questions around understanding or really gauging the knowledge that teenagers have. And you can see from the bright colors and the things that we developed that we wanted to make it really poppy and a little bit interesting for teenagers as well. So I'll show you that if you just go up to a little bit here about our Vaping Education Advisory Group, we have some great expert knowledge that we've got involved who look at the evidence and resources that we have on this website. We have two public health experts, which is Professor Janet Hoek and Professor Richard Edwards. We have Matt Tukaki, who is New Zealand Maori Council Executive, and he's been very outspoken about his concerns around vaping, especially in Maori teenagers. We've got Professor Lutz Beckett and Professor Bob Hancox, who are both respiratory physicians down in the South Island who have been involved in tobacco control research. Dr. Stuart Jones, who was our medical director and who is a respiratory specialist up in Counties Manukau, and Dr. David McNamara and Professor Philip Pattermore, who are both paediatric respiratory physicians. Richard Dykes, who was heavily involved with Secondary Principals Association of New Zealand and is a school principal down at Nelson College, and Nicola Corner, who is a nurse practitioner who's a respiratory specialist at Counties Manukau. Professor Jim Reid, who is a GP, but has been very involved in primary care, clinical treatment, and also with tobacco control as well. So that's a little bit about the people that have been instrumental in helping us devise this Don't Get Sucked In website. There's a lot of information on here just to make you aware of it, particularly around the resources. We currently have posters which are in here, which people can download for free and print out at their schools, and we have them both in English and also in Tereo, and they're nice and catchy sort of ones that we came out with. Cinnamon tastes better on donuts, referring to all the flavors that there are. It's not just water vapor. So it's good to be aware of those resources. And down here, you'll also find a research and findings page, and we do keep this up to date. I have someone who, I do a lot of reading and research in the space anyway, and then we upload them to make it easier for people to access those papers. So things like what's in a vape, on the risks, evidence around youth vaping, impact of social media, health, cardiovascular impact, nicotine, gateway to smoking. And a very good one down here is actually comes out of Australia, because of course their regulations have tightened up immensely in the vaping space, which is a link to over 100 medical and scientific organizations and their position on vaping, which is quite different to the public health position, I have to say. So this is really just letting you know what is out there and to check out the website. So vapes, basically there's many names, and I know that, you know, some of the audience and people looking at this talk come from a variety of different backgrounds in terms of their knowledge around vape. Some of you will be well versed in it, others may be new to it, but they come in many different names: vape, e-cigarettes. In the medical and scientific journals, they're often referred to as electronic nicotine delivery systems, but effectively they're all the same. They just come in many, many different shapes and styles nowadays. They're made up of a flavor, a nicotine amount, a sweetener, and a solvent. And of course, that is heated, that liquid or e-liquid is heated into an aerosol that the user inhales. And what I wanted to share with you to think about, if, I mean, you know, I've got 5 tamariki myself, so 5 children. So, you know, I know what's going on. I'm hearing about parties and things like that, but I wanted you to be aware of the sort of marketing, because we've really changed from where marketing on products used to be in magazines and you'd have glossies. Now all the marketing is a lot harder to be aware of because it's in social media, and this is what our teenagers are being exposed to all the time. If you go on to something like the Air Scream.
Where you going? Straight to the top. Straight to the top. Where you going? Going straight to the top. To the top. To the top. To the top. Beat to the pavement. Believe I can make it. Progress and patience. I'm achieving greatness. 3, 2, 1, then I'm taking flight. Catapult to brand new heights. Victory stays in my sights. No denying the future's bright. Watch this, you'll be inspired. Inside me burns a fire. Fueling these desires. All which will be acquired. Rising higher, claim what's mine. Chin up as I aim for the sky. Born with it, don't be surprised. Here to stay, never rise.
Now that's just Air Scream. They're a predominant player, especially down here in Wellington, I have to say. And that's the sort of thing that our kids are being exposed to all of the time. There's influencers as well. Austin Lawrence is known as the vape god. He came into sort of recognition around 2017. And I'll show you a little bit. Hopefully
there is a better way to make
probably an ad which we'll have to skip.
Selling physical products. Introducing the...
Welcome everybody to Ligma Army.
But as you can see, I mean, you know, these are the amazing tricks that our teenagers are, you know, seeing on Instagram, on social media all the time. And it has got quite a big following out there. And, you know, if we're all honest, I mean, it looks really cool. You know, I mean, that's what it's targeted at.
No, there ain't no stopping us. Fly without boarding pass.
Interestingly, that triangle, of course, is the Air Scream logo.
Letitia, sorry to interrupt. Would you be happy? A question's just popped up in the chat. Would we be able to get a copy of your PowerPoint after the presentation?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, and all the links should work as well. And cut in, because I haven't got all the videos, so feel free just to voice in, Joe, whenever you want. I mean, it is an interactive thing, so hopefully, you know, just pop in with questions. Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you.
The other one that I want to show is, so this is YouTube. This is really popular at the moment with kids because tricks are really quick, as you know. I mean, there's Instagram and things like that, but these TikToks around what we're seeing with vape tricks are really engaging in what a lot of our teenagers are following. They're nice and sharp and short. And the other one I'll just show you now, this was actually out of the US to show how clever some of these devices are becoming. And certainly internet sales, are of concern of kids accessing the sort of products which I'll show you now, but just trying to get this link.
Take a close look. This student is outfitted with vaping devices, but you can't see them. Why? They're designed to look just like normal school gear, for sale online and in vape shops, giving kids new ways to hide their vaping habits anywhere they go, including school.
It's rampant. I think every administrator who has a middle school and high school are grappling with vaping issues.
Superintendent Melissa Varley oversees the Berkeley Heights School District in New Jersey.
It's virtually undetectable. We don't know if a student is vaping in a classroom.
So would you know what to look for?
We're taking over a classroom at this high school. It's filled with student volunteers. Thank you, guys. We're going to plant these hidden vaping devices and bring in teachers and parents and see just how well they do at spotting the vape.
I get to work.
Here's one that's designed to look just like a black marker.
Stashing stuff all over the classroom.
So this guy looks like a USB. It's not, it's a vape.
And on students too.
Sophia looks like she's just wearing a regular hoodie, but underneath a vaping device.
Some vapes even look just like school supplies.
Looks just like a pen, but the vaping device is inside and you can write with it.
Time to bring in our volunteers.
I'm Vicki Wynn with the Today Show.
It's nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Miss Moretti.
Okay, Miss Moretti.
Yes.
We want to know if you can spot the vape. So we have outfitted this classroom with vaping devices. Look high, look low. You ready?
I think I'm ready.
You get 1 minute.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
She spots a couple of them,
That device that Dom's got there,
but breezes right past most
I think that could be.
before time runs out.
And that is time. How many of you had a vaping device that she spotted?
3 items, not bad.
How many of you actually have vaping devices?
But she missed 11 of the 14 items we hid.
It's scary because it could be just in plain sight.
Some teachers spot a couple of the more obvious ones,
That looks like one, too.
but most miss the harder to find items like this watch.
Sam is wearing what looks like a smartwatch, but if you press this button, this part comes out. You can fill this with nicotine and it's an e-cigarette.
It blends in so nobody would ever know.
All 5 teachers missing this.
So I thought these were really interesting to show you just how far the market is coming with these products. And, it's really important as I talk through this presentation that we need to look at vaping as a standalone issue amongst teenagers as opposed to vaping as a smoking cessation tool for current smokers. Now's the time, and it should have been quite a while ago actually, to separate those out. Talking about nicotine strengths, you may see that they're sometimes referred to milligrams and sometimes they're percentages, but this is quite a good slide to show you that basically 3 milligrams of nicotine salts is 0.3% and 50 milligrams is 5%. Here in New Zealand, and I'll talk a little bit about the regulations later on, but they're capped at 50 milligrams for nicotine salts and 20 milligrams for standard free-base nicotine. So we were seeing up to 60 milligrams of nicotine salts in some of these pods. Generally now, and I've been having a look around the stores, it tends to be at 50, which is still quite a lot. So to put that into perspective, the average cigarette contains about 10 to 12 milligrams of nicotine. And people inhale between 1.1 to 1.8 milligrams of nicotine in each cigarette. So for a pack, somebody is inhaling around 22 to 36 milligrams of nicotine, remembering that's a pack of cigarettes. So pods that contain up to 50 milligrams, where it's capped in New Zealand, of nicotine salts, what we're hearing from concerned parents and teenagers, that they're often having these pods within 2 or 3 hours of 50 milligrams of nicotine. And right there is your hook. I mean, nicotine is extremely addictive, and often the kids don't know what strength they're even having. And I think that, we can't deny the fact that the nicotine is the addictive product that once kids gets them hooked and keeps them coming back. This is a Air Pop. They're sold also by the Air Scream company. Now, the industry, it is $1 billion industry. E-cigarettes reached 20.4 billion in sales in 21 and are expected to go to 30 billion by 2025. It's a very, very profitable market. And I've challenged the vaping industry on this on many occasions at the ministry and in Parliament, because, you know, they're not charities like Life Education Trust. They're not charities like us. They are there to make money. And one of the best ways to do that is to have the customers come back. And of course, that's why the nicotine levels are so high. So what is the evidence of youth vaping in New Zealand? I'm sure you've all seen the survey that we did. We had a huge response to the survey, actually a lot more than we anticipated, with over 19,000 respondents. 27% of those survey reported vaping and 15% reported in the last week. We actually found 27%, of course, had vaped in the last 7 days. There were over 283 schools across New Zealand who participated, and 20% were vaping daily or several times a day. Now, there are limitations with any survey, you know, whether it's the New Zealand Health Survey, whether it's the Youth 19 survey, but it's a snapshot. It can't be generalized across the board, but this is just a voluntary snapshot, and the data was cleaned excessively to make sure that there weren't any outliers, and we had a statistician involved in that. So the year group, year 10 obviously became the most prominent involved in the survey. I was surprised that we didn't get a higher uptake of the year 12 and 13, but it may also just be the fact that, you know, I'm a year 12 or 13, I'm not going to do a stupid survey. So it may be that the year 10s and, you know, we're a little bit more, felt like obliged to do the survey. This is really important because we found that there wasn't much differentiation between Maori or New Zealand European at all. And I think that that's something to be really conscious of, because I know that the Ministry of Health are talking about launching this vaping education campaign. And I know they've talked about it being aimed at Maori, and it's not. This is a youth problem. And I think we need to be really conscious of that. The other thing is that it is actually across the board. These were the deciles of schools that were involved in our study or survey, but the Youth 19 survey, and I'll show you that later, had actually high decile schools where it was a problem. You know, Auckland Grammar has been quite outspoken in other high decile schools. So I think we just need to really, when we're looking at any education to youth, it's across the board. You know, it doesn't matter what socioeconomic level, it doesn't matter what ethnicity. This is a youth problem, and we need to really target it across that whole spectrum. Now, of those who were vaping, 59% were vaping several times a day, which was of concern. And even bigger concern were the high nicotine doses that they were vaping at. So between 24 and 50 milligrams. And these are like the Airscream vape pens that I was talking about before, very popular. You know, you buy them, you dispose of them. And, you know, they do have these very high nicotine levels. This is also of concern, was the fact that they were not only vaping at higher doses compared to the previous year, but they were also vaping more frequently. And that comes back to this high nicotine level. And, you know, we do have to be concerned about that. Dairies were the most dominant in our survey, where they were accessing these. And then friends were secondary, although the Hawke's Bay survey, which was a good survey for down in their region, found that friends and family were where they actually got the most of their vapes. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the regulations play out and affect the access to dairies, because as we know, dairies and petrol stations are only supposed to be selling 3 flavors, you know, the menthol and the mint and the tobacco. But what we are finding now, and certainly we're hearing when we get phone calls, is that some dairies are cornering off a segment of their dairy and making it a specialist vape shop, a dedicated specialist vape shop. And that's a huge concern, because then of course they can sell the myriad of flavors that are available. So the recommendations that we've put out is that really we need to look at limiting the nicotine concentration, because this is the addictive component to the vapes. Raising the legal age, you know, is a possibility as well. Certainly banning in front of store window advertising in the product displays is huge. We have very colorful public, displays in the windows. Some of them look like, their iPod or Apple shops. So, I think that is something that's really important. And preventing the sale of vape products close to schools, that's controversial, but we do have a problem here. So we're really looking at, if we make a noise about this, what are we going to land on? And emphasis, of course, has to be placed on an Aotearoa educational campaign that's aimed at youth. And of course, that's where you guys come in, and it's your expertise. The ASH Year 10 survey, we're still waiting for the results of last year's one to come out. They are taking quite some time. There was certainly an increase in regular vaping in the previous one. So 2019, you can see that there's been an increase. And interestingly enough, and this was something that we worked with Professor Philip Padmore on and some others, that there was in the first 2 decades ever a slight increase in cigarette smoking as well. And that's a huge concern. It's a worry from the World Health Organization about it being a gateway to smoking. However, with the generational cutoff and the new smoke-free legislation that came through, then hopefully that won't be as big of an issue, because we were making really good inroads on cutting down smoking in youth, and the last thing we'd want to see is actually youth taking up cigarette smoking.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yep, go for it, Jo. Yep.
Kate was wondering what the difference is between salts and freebase.
Yep, I've got a slide covering that, so it's a very, very good question. Yeah.
And the other one is, does it have to say on the packet how much nicotine is in the product?
Yes, yeah, it does. So the legislation, generally you'll see it'll either be, the most common is around, it'll say 3% or it'll say 15%, and it'll sort of jump from 3, 15, 25, 50 milligrams or 5%. So it does have to say the nicotine content, and it does have to say that nicotine is highly addictive now as part of those regulations.
Thank you.
So this is the Youth 19 survey, and this is where I was talking about, where we can't just look at this being a lower decile school issue, because actually what we found from this, and there was over 7,000 students, 7,700 involved in the Youth 19 survey, and it was Northland, Auckland and Waikato which were involved in this survey. So, we do have to be aware that it is across the board, and it's a problem across all schools. This is the New Zealand Youth, New Zealand Health Survey. And I would actually, they've really tried to downplay this, but I think that it's still showing that there's a problem with vaping going up. I mean, this was 2020, 2021, and we found that in the 15 to 17 years group, having ever tried an e-cigarette was 19%, and then jumping up to 32%. And then, your school leavers, that 18 to 24 years, were trying e-cigarettes at 58%. Now, we all understand kids experiment, I mean, of course, but when they don't realize they're experimenting with something which is highly addictive, or nicotine concentrations can be high enough to have that dependency, then that can be an issue. Daily e-cigarette use from the New Zealand Health Survey, same thing. They sort of downplayed, oh, it's only 5.8%. Yeah, but it went from 2.3 to 5.8. What is that going to look like in another year's time? And the same with that 18 to 24 year group, which were just previously secondary school students. It's 15.3%. And that's daily e-cigarette use. So I think we do have to be concerned about the trend. So what are some of the health concerns with vaping? Well, most of the ingredients, as we all know, they're generally recognised by the FDA as being fine for consumption, but the lungs are really, really delicate, and they do affect the lung tissue and the lung lining, and they haven't been approved for inhalation, and that's the big difference. Nicotine, and this is coming to that excellent question around the nicotine freebase and nicotine salts. So the vaping industry and manufacturers came up with this great idea that, of course, nicotine actually doesn't taste that great. It's one of the things we're looking at in the new smoke-free Aotearoa 2025 is removing the filter on traditional cigarettes, because to actually smoke a cigarette without a filter tastes disgusting, because nicotine is really bitter. Nicotine salts are that nicotine, but it's combined with a weak acid, usually benzoic acid, and that makes it really palatable, really smooth on the throat so that you can take a higher hit of nicotine and you won't, it won't taste disgusting. There's been ample evidence now, and you can just go into our survey and have a look in the conclusions and all the references around this. Nicotine does disrupt brain development, especially in adolescents and young adults where that is still forming. It's highly addictive. It does affect the cardiovascular and respiratory system. And in the European Union Council, they've capped it at 20 milligrams per mil for nicotine. And you know, that's what we really should have here for our nicotine salts as well in our vaping products. Flavors, appealing flavors have been identified as a big reason for e-cigarette consumption in teenagers. More than 17,000 flavors are available in the industry now. I mean, there's just so many that are out there, and it's just growing. If I go back to 2017, it's just growing on year in leaps and bounds. Certain flavors are more toxic than others, and I presented this to the Health Select Committee. You know, cinnamon and vanilla are more toxic. They induce inflammation and damage to the lung lining. And of course, the long-term studies around the effects of vaping are still to come. We're not going to know about the carcinogenic factors of vaping until many, many years from now. But we do know that instantly they do cause damage to the lungs. You do get that inflammation, and certain flavors are worse than others. Propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin are the basis for most vaping products. These are the major components, and they're the humectants that stop it from drying out. Safe for ingestion by the FDA, but little, of course, known, although that more is coming, that these are an irritant on the lungs, and the ratios can differ. And hopefully with the new regulations around ingredients, those amounts and those ratios will be labelled. Byproducts, heating around a metal coil or heating these products does produce some byproducts. Propylene glycol can produce acetaldehyde or formaldehyde, known carcinogenics. They both cause irritation to the lung lining. And of course, there's heavy metals such as copper, magnesium, and ultrafine particles that get deep, deep into the lungs. And there's plenty of studies out there. And as I said, if you just go onto the Don't Get Sucked In website and you want to read any of these, you know, the medical and scientific journals around this, you'll be able to find those. So there's certainly challenges with the messaging out there. And the biggest challenge, and I've said this to Ash on numerous occasions, and public health, is this scenario of them being much, much less harmful, or 95% safer than cigarette smoking or traditional smoking. And for teenagers, and I'm sure you guys hear this, that seems like, oh, much, much less harmful. Okay, well, that means they're safe. 95% safer than cigarette smoking, safe. You know, that's sort of what they hear with cotton wool in the ears. And so that's been a really big issue for us to tackle. The 95% should never be used. We pushed against it being used on the Vaping Facts Ministry website, and it shouldn't be. It was basically put out by Public Health England, and it was refuted many times that it was just a modelling number that they came up with, and it was a catchphrase that worked well, and the vaping industry just propagated along the way. So if we look at evidence-based and medical societies, we go to the World Health Organization report, which came out in July last year. We go to the Thoracic Society of Australia and New Zealand, the European Respiratory Society, Pediatric Society, World Heart Federation, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology. All of these medical and scientific organizations are saying vaping is not harmless. It does cause harm, and there's actually very little evidence that it is useful as a smoking cessation tool. But that's not the area that we want to concentrate on. We want to use it now, or focus on it, the fact that it is a problem in youth, just vaping itself. There's a real need to focus on the educational campaign, and simple messaging is required. Vapes are harmful versus the harm reduction campaign that's been focused on smoking coming from population health. I checked this quite recently. As of February 14th, 2022, there were 666 specialist vape retailers across the country. That's a huge amount, you know, to put that into perspective. I mean, there's 120 KFCs around the country. You know, I mean, this is a lot. People can access vapes very, very easily if they want to. If they're looking at this as a true way to quit smoking, the accessibility is immense across the country. Now, the World Health Organization put out a very powerful document. This was the report in July last year that I mentioned about. And in the first 5 pages, it has these 1-page statements. ENDS are addictive and not without harm. ENDS should be strictly regulated for maximum protection of public health. And children and adolescents who use ENDS can double their risk of smoking cigarettes. It's really ironic that the World Health Organization puts out such strong statements around vaping, and yet we don't seem to be listening to them in New Zealand. And I find that really ironic during this COVID space where we're following so strictly the World Health Organization's ideas of how to keep safe, and yet when they put something like this out, we seem to have largely ignored it. And you know, that's why it's up to us and it's up to you guys to put that right. The current timeline around regulations in Aotearoa is as follows. We're sitting here at the moment. We just passed 11th of February 2022, where notifiable products and ingredients have to be listed in a centralized database. It's going to be very interesting, although some time away, when we get to 2023, where the vape retailers must submit their annual reports and returns. You know, we're very transparent, you know, as charities, we have the Charity Service Commission where we have to lodge our annual reports and our financials. So it's going to be very interesting to see what that looks like come that time. This is the registration of notified products database that they just set up now. And just recently, I checked it a couple of days ago, we're at 12,475 notified products listed. And these are things where they talk about, you know, the product, nicotine salt, Hell Vape, names Ice Mint, who the manufacturer is. So all of these notified products and ingredients are listed on this database. That's a lot of products. As I mentioned before, the strength of freebase nicotine shouldn't exceed 20 milligrams per mil, but the strength of the nicotine salt is at 50 milligrams per mil. In Australia, from October 1st, you can no longer buy or import nicotine e-cigarettes or nicotine vaping products without a valid doctor's prescription. That reinforces the need to have that doctor's prescription before purchasing any of them. And it makes sense because actually to give up smoking, the studies that have come out, like the New England Journal of Medicine one with Professor Hayden McRobbie, talked about wraparound services. You really need that whole behavioural change to quit smoking, not just going to a vape store and getting a product and then attempting to quit. And there's been a lot of rebound or people dual using anyway, which is actually worse than even cigarette smoking on its own. So this makes sense to me that it should be a doctor's prescription because you can have that wraparound service to help people to quit. So in conclusion, I mean, talking with teens about the concerns and that vapes are not harmless is key. The Don't Get Sucked In website is a good way to just start the conversation. And ultimately, education of youth is going to be the key way to address this issue. The Don't Get Sucked In website, I said this to John and Joe, you know, this is a website that we can put stuff up on, we can change. So, you know, your feedback, if you guys want anything up there, if you think that we're missing something, you know, this is a website that we want to really share and utilize. And, you know, we're open to being able to change anything on that as information comes to hand. And I'll just leave you with one last slide, and it came out of a Canadian Journal of Cardiology last year, and I thought it sums it up immensely, where it's been suggested that for every smoker who achieves cessation using ENDS, 80 adolescents will become addicted to nicotine. And I think that's a real concern, and I think that's what we're seeing here today. So that's the presentation. Thank you.
Gosh, that was so interesting. I'm just going to move this across. I've got another question about freebase. Do they come in flavours? The way
Yes.
the way that salt's
Uh,
dosed?
So the free-base nicotine is what you're really talking about, the nicotine in cigarettes. So the nicotine salts are really the ones that have all the flavors. Those are the ones that are in the e-liquids, etc.
And this is just another question about cost. Do you know roughly what the cost of an ear pop would be?
Oh yeah, these actually aren't expensive. I mean, you can get single e-cigarette vapes for $9, $10.
Wow.
So, you know, these are the disposable ones that are quite, you know, they're used at the parties and handed around.
I just found it personally so sad when watching the video where they were disguising the vapes, just because you can see that marketers know exactly who they're targeting with these things, that they have to be disguised for the young people to actually be able to use them consistently through the day, etc. So it's such a deliberate planning and marketing ploy, which on our young people is just so sad.
Yeah.
I'm just checking if there's any other questions that have come through in the chat there. It doesn't seem to be. Is anybody else sitting on a question that they want to jump in with?
I mean, hopefully it's just given a bit of insight and some ideas. I know that some of you probably know a lot of that information, but you know, it's keeping it fresh and being aware of the sort of marketing that our kids are being exposed to that adults probably aren't even aware of, you know, with the TikToks. And interestingly enough, I had our research manager said to me today that there was a craze about vaping and wedding photos now. So newlyweds are having vape photos taken. Which is not our teenagers, but I find that quite interesting.
Letitia, with the thinking about cigarettes and how much of a cigarette is taxed, what's the story with vape? Not taxed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't believe it's taxed at the moment, but it would make sense that it would be taxed. And I know that groups like, you know, Tax Union Party and things have been against our position on really regulating these. And it makes me think that there's probably a bit of money in this as well. So I think that, you know, getting the annual reports in 2023 will be insightful as to see how much money is actually out there in New Zealand. You know, how much is being spent in this market.
Can I ask another question? I'm going to anyway. With the, like you saying about what's happening in Australia, and they seem to be a lot more proactive in stamping this out than we are. I know with other things like nutritional guidelines and things, we sort of mirror each other. Why do you think in New Zealand compared to Australia that this is not the same?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's probably a lot of politics involved and behind that. If I'm honest, I think, you know, we did drop the ball in 2017 where it just hit all the market, and then we're slowly just trying to fix it all. But then, you know, the tobacco industry has been very clever with their whole smoke-free world, which is run by Philip Morris, in basically funding Indigenous populations. And we do have that in New Zealand here, where they're solely funded by Philip Morris to get Maori, specifically Maori women, off of cigarette smoking, but they've given them money. And so it's sort of seen that that's had quite a bit of a political influence. And I think that's really complicated things, because there's no doubt that for some people, and you do hear these stories, and we hear these stories where people have used these to get off of cigarettes, but they've been with that real wraparound service and intense support. Unfortunately, the byproduct of that has been that it's been a free market, and it's just created this other problem for youth. And that's why I think with this targeted campaign and with what you guys can do and your expertise is, okay, let's get straight away, if someone starts talking about smoking cessation, pull them right back and go, actually, no, this is a standalone vape issue. And it's really ironic now that, you know, the ministry is wanting to roll out a vaping education campaign to teenagers, which has been incredibly frustrating for me to watch. And, you know, they wanted to interview me the other day on it. And I think they're going to go about it all the wrong way. I think you guys are going to do a much, much better job, because they're going to focus on Maori when I talk to them, and that's not the case. This is across the board, as you saw from some of those slides. This is a youth issue, and if you just try and pigeonhole and target one area, they're going to miss a whole load of teenagers.
Thank you.
There's a couple of questions. Genevieve's asked if we can use the website questionnaire in the classroom. So we do have a fact sort type activity where kids have to use their critical thinking and decide if it's a myth or if it's actually true. And that helps us ascertain what they actually know and what they think they know. But the quiz on the Don't Get Sucked In website is really quite in depth and straightforward. So I would say to Genevieve that yes, you can use that if you want to modify it and make it interactive with students. But Letitia, you can give us the royal nod on that one. Is that?
Yes, no, you can absolutely use anything, and have a little look around the site. And as I said, you know, there may be things, suggestions. I mean, you know, this is a partnership, and you know, it's great to be involved with when Joe and John approached me about this, because you guys, as I said, have the expertise in actually delivering to the kids, and we've got the resources and the knowledge in that space. So, you know, if you want to put up then a video, or if there's a game or something you want to load up or whatever, or somebody sees something, the website, you know, we own and we edit ourselves internally, so we can do it very quickly. We don't have to go through anybody else, you know, and we can show the Vaping Education Advisory Board, and they give the nod and up it goes.
Brilliant. Here's another question. Bringing the cigarette ban in for people under a certain age, will that apply to vapes with nicotine? Oh yes, so it was under something about an age group where they couldn't buy cigarettes. Was it 20?
Yeah, it was it's the year that they're born, but no, it's not vapes. I mean, vapes are still, you can buy them if you're over 18, but the problem is that what we're finding is that I actually did an interview not that long ago, I think it's going to be coming out shortly, where they had an undercover group, 15-year-old go to stores to get vapes, and I think they said that it was something like 5 out of the 8 didn't check the ID, and they were easily able to buy them. So, I mean, as you all know, regulations are one thing, but actually enforcing them, I mean, back in the day when they put in the legal age for drinking, pubs, you know, they had stings where people would go in, and if they were found with underage teenagers, then those pubs had to pay a lot of money and be fined. And I think that if they're serious about this, then that would be the sort of thing they would have to really try and, you know, put some sort of some negative aspect to the people who are selling these products, and regulate it.
It's just a sign. Jenny's talked about, she's got a large number of intermediates with vaping problems. So she gets asked to cover vaping a lot. So she's just put a thank you in there for the great PD that's going to help her when she delivers some of her programs. Yeah. Oh, that was really informative. Thank you so much, Letitia, especially for giving up an evening, which is the time that seems to suit our educators to be able to make PD. So we really appreciate you staying up to help us.
No worries. And as I said, if there's any questions that come through, just compile them, collate them. Joe, and happy to send them through. Happy to help. And yeah, let's. I'm sure that you know, between the two groups, we'll be able to really make an impact on this space.
That's brilliant. We hope so too. Thanks so much for working with us, Letitia. Thank you everybody for joining us. And
thanks, team.
have a good evening.
Right.
Thank you.